Okay, as I was saying, we're the Eternal Companion, and we're in the chapter Mystic Visions on page 97. To quote Akhilananda's own words, Maharaj made us feel that spiritual awakening and God realization are not difficult to achieve. He made us understand that if we only struggle a little, tremendous help will be given us, and that we shall easily reach the goal. In his later years, Maharaj had the vision of Sri Ramakrishna every day. He used to tell me, I see Sri Ramakrishna every day and talk to him. To another disciple, he said, I see Sri Ramakrishna whenever he chooses to reveal himself to me. By his grace, you also will see him and talk to him. Although Maharaj lived almost continuously in a high state of consciousness, he was very natural and human in his behavior. Even when he was quite a young man, Sri Ramakrishna said of him, Rakal is the kind of mango which still looks green outside when it is ripe and sweet within. And this was true throughout his life. Whenever he could, he would hide his ecstatic mood and act in the most normal way. I've already mentioned his sense of humor. Balaram's wife once dreamt that she was feeding Maharaj. Taking this for an omen, she invited him to a sumptuous feast which she herself cooked. When Maharaj had enjoyed the dinner, he turned to her grandson and said, Tell your grandmother to dream more often. His love of gardening has been referred to in an earlier chapter. At every monastery he visited, he gave valuable advice as to the laying out of gardens. Often he would gaze at the blossoming flowers and remark, Look, there you see the worship of God in his universal form going on unceasingly. Maharaj also loved music. He always had a band of musicians or a singer with him. Maharaj himself did not sing much, just occasionally a line or so. But every morning he would chant the various names of the Lord in a sweet voice. One day a fine musician was playing musical scales. Maharaj went into a spiritual mood. A devotee complained that no devotional songs were being played. This jarred Maharaj. He turned to the devotee and said, Don't you realize that sound is Brahman? One day at the Ramakrishna Mat in Madras, I was in the monastery's library, whose doors open onto a large hallway. The shrine is directly above. As I opened the library door, I suddenly saw Maharaj in the distance, with arms outstretched, moving about the hall as though he were dancing. He was alone and completely absorbed in God. Speechless with amazement, I watched him, thrilled by the sight. Suddenly his eyes fell upon me, and with arms still outstretched, he advanced in my direction. However, I at once began to feel nervous and started to back away. I did not consider myself pure enough to touch Maharaj while he was in such a lofty mood, and I was afraid that my presence might disturb his ecstasy. So I silently shut the library door and went away. Many of his householder disciples came to Maharaj with their worldly troubles and problems. Not only did he listen to them sympathetically, but he also gave them constructive advice. Many successful professional men, such as doctors, lawyers, engineers, found it very easy to discuss the problems of their work with Maharaj. He would listen with intelligent interest and understanding, and was often able to offer a new suggestion or another angle of approach to the problem. Even though he was interested in everything and in all the events of his time, his intimate disciples could see that beneath this apparent interest, Maharaj always remained completely detached. The things of the world rolled off him like drops of water off a lotus leaf. The next chapter, his passing. I have already described how Sri Ramakrishna saw Rakhal dancing with Sri Krishna on a mystic lotus shortly before the boy's first visit to Dakshineshwar. Only a few intimate disciples knew of this vision, and Sri Ramakrishna had warned them never to reveal it to Maharaj, explaining that if he realized his true nature as the eternal companion of Krishna, he would leave this mortal body. The secret had therefore been very carefully guarded. In March 1922, Maharaj went to Calcutta to stay for a while at the home of Balaram. Balaram himself had already passed away, but his whole family were sincere devotees of Ramakrishna, and his beautiful guest house was always at the disposal of all the swamis and disciples of the order. It is now regarded as a place of pilgrimage, sanctified by the presence of so many holy men. While Maharaj was staying at the guest house, Ramlal Dada came to visit him. Ramlal Dada was a pure soul and a devotee of a very high order. During Ramakrishna's lifetime, he had been one of the master's personal attendants and had served him with great devotion. Whenever he and Maharaj were together, their talk naturally turned to the early days. They would laugh and joke together, for they stimulated each other's sense of fun. One day, Maharaj asked Ramlal Dada to sing for him the songs he used to sing for Ramakrishna. It was arranged that many disciples and devotees should be present to hear the singing. Ramlal Dada began to sing songs about Krishna and the shepherds and shepherdesses of Vrindavan. At first, everyone was very gay as Ramlal mimicked the gestures of the shepherdesses, making his audience laugh. Suddenly, Maharaj, who had also been enjoying the fun, became serious. Ramlal Dada was singing, "Come back, O Krishna, come back to Vrindavan. Come and reign in the hearts of your beloved shepherds and shepherdesses. Do not forget that you are a shepherd yourself." At that moment, Maharaj seemed transported to a realm beyond this earth. The joking and laughter stopped. The atmosphere became calm and serene. It may be that at this moment, Maharaj got a partial glimpse of his true nature and knew himself to be God's eternal companion. The events that followed seemed to point to some such revelation. A few days later, at midnight, Nirvanananda, a disciple and personal attendant of Maharaj, saw his master sitting on his bed in a very earnest mood. The disciple stood silently before him, waiting for him to speak. Maharaj looked at him and said, "I woke suddenly and saw Sri Ramakrishna standing just there." He pointed to a spot in front of a couch, adding, "He didn't speak to me. He stood there silently for a while and then disappeared. I don't understand it." After a few moments, Maharaj continued in a low, earnest voice, "I can't give my mind to the things of this world any longer. It wants to take complete refuge in him and him alone." Shortly after this, the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna was celebrated. Maharaj stayed at the Belur Math for the occasion. Then he returned to Balaram's house in Calcutta. 2 days later, he had a slight attack of cholera, but recovered within a week. This illness, which left him feeble, was followed by diabetes, which took a serious turn. Many doctors came to treat him, one of whom wore the religious mark on his forehead. "Doctor," said Maharaj, "the Lord Shiva, whose symbol you wear on your forehead, is the only reality. Everything else is unreal." A devotee asked, "Maharaj, are you suffering very greatly?" "Please try to realize," Maharaj answered, that in my condition I have to bear all physical suffering patiently and without complaint. But as he said this, his face lighted up with a divine radiance. The pain seemed to have melted away. He lost external consciousness and became absorbed in meditation. About 9 o'clock the same evening, he placed his hand on Nirvanananda and said, "Do not grieve. You have served me well. You shall be merged in God and reach knowledge of Brahman. I give you my blessing that you may attain this." Then he called all the disciples and devotees who were present to his side. For each he had a blessing and an affectionate word. "Ah, my children," he said tenderly, "never forget God, and you will realize the highest good. Do not sorrow. I shall be with you always." Once more, he became absorbed in his transcendental vision. After some time had passed, he continued in a sweet, tender voice, "I am floating. I am floating on the leaf of faith and knowledge on the ocean of Brahman." Then suddenly he exclaimed, "Ah, the feet of Sri Ramakrishna, I know them. Viveka, my brother, Vivekananda, Premananda, Yogananda." Thus, with his divine sight, he recognized the brother disciples who had already passed away. He was living in that transcendental realm where he had lived throughout his life, but now he no longer concealed the fact. He began to describe his visions. "Ah," he murmured softly, "the blissful ocean of Brahman, Om. Salutations to the Supreme Brahman, Om. Salutations to the Supreme Atman." While speaking of his divine experiences, his throat became dry. The disciple offered him a drink, saying, "Maharaj, please drink this water. It has lemon in it." "The mind doesn't want to come down from Brahman," said Maharaj slowly. "Pour Brahman into Brahman." And like a child, he opened his mouth for the water to be poured into it. Then he turned to Swami Sardananda and said, "Brother, Sri Ramakrishna is real. His divine incarnation is real." After this, Maharaj was silent for a while. He was deeply absorbed in meditation, and his face wore an expression of great sweetness. The minds of those who were present were so uplifted that they felt no grief, only joy and silent calm. All sense of the world and of death was lost. Suddenly, out of the silence, the voice of Maharaj was heard. "Ah, that inexpressible light, Ramakrishna, the Krishna of my Ramakrishna. I am the shepherd boy. Put anklets on my feet. I want to dance with my Krishna. I want to hold his hand, the little boy Krishna. Ah, Krishna, my Krishna, you have come. Krishna, Krishna, can't you see him? Haven't you eyes to see? Oh, how beautiful, my Krishna, on the lotus, eternal, the sweet one. My play is over now. Look, the child Krishna is caressing me. He is calling me to come away with him. I am coming." The tenderness and heavenly compassion that filled his heart was expressed in every word he uttered. The whole atmosphere of the large hall where he was lying seemed to vibrate with this emotion. No one can describe the extraordinary sense of holiness which was created by his presence. Everyone knew that the fateful hour was approaching and that Maharaj was taking his final leave. During the early hours of the morning, he remained silent for some time and fell into a slumber. At 7 o'clock, he awoke and was once again possessed by this high spiritual mood. He called the few disciples who had just arrived, but who had not been present the previous night. To each he gave his blessing, bestowing comfort and fearlessness. 2 more days passed, and another night came on. By this time, his life was despaired of, and gloom fell upon all. His physical condition grew worse and worse, and the doctors were amazed that he had not passed into a coma days before, as is usual with this kind of illness. But so great was the power and spirituality of his mind, so completely was it freed from the meshes of physical matter, that it remained completely unaffected by the condition of his suffering body. He maintained perfect consciousness right up to the last moment of his life. As the last evening faded into night, his chest suddenly heaved. It was as if a great wave of breath passed up the body to the throat. His half-closed eyes opened, and he gazed into the distance, his eyes shining with a brilliance and unspeakable beauty. Thus it was that on April 10th, 1922, the life left his body. "Do not grieve, I shall be with you always." Those were his last words to his disciples. After his passing away, we all had the feeling that Maharaj was intensely present within us. He was closer to us than ever before. As long as Maharaj was in the physical body, there was a barrier. Afterward, the barrier was gone. More than 40 years have passed since that day, and every disciple can bear witness to the fact that Maharaj still lives, protects, and guides him onward toward the goal. When I was about to leave India and take up my duties in the United States, Swami Shivananda said to me, "Never forget that you have seen the Son of God. You have seen God." Okay, now, we can start on reminiscences by other Swamis. Swami Nirvanananda was one of Swami Prabhupananda's closest monastic brothers. We knew him as Suji Maharaj, and he was one of the 2 that came to dedicate this temple here in Santa Barbara. He came with Swami Madhavananda in 1956. So, Swami got this reminiscent directly from Suji Maharaj, who was, of course, with Maharaj at the time. Okay, we will start on Swami Ambikananda's reminiscences. My parents were devotees of Sri Ramakrishna and often visited him at Dakshineshwar. During her pregnancy, my mother decided that if a son was born, she would dedicate it to the service of Sri Ramakrishna. Through the grace of the Lord, I was the son born to her. She resolved to keep her promise. One day, when I was a few weeks old, my mother carried me snugly bundled up in a sheet to Dakshineshwar. My father accompanied us. Sri Ramakrishna, in an ecstatic mood, was standing alone. As soon as he saw my parents, he said to my mother, "Hello, what have you brought me?" Mother placed me at the feet of the master and replied, "I have brought you this offering." Sri Ramakrishna looked at me for a few moments and remarked, "Ah, what a nice child. Are you offering it to me? Good." He took me on his lap, put his right palm on my head as a blessing, and then placed me back in my mother's arms, saying, "Take care of this child now, but know that he belongs to me. In due time, I will take him back." Years later, when I joined the Ramakrishna Monastery, my mother was the happiest of all, for she felt that Sri Ramakrishna had accepted me. Sri Ramakrishna had by then passed away. Now, this was very not exceptional in India. Most Indian mothers are not thrilled when their sons join the monastery. In fact, many of them cry and wail and come after their sons and want to kidnap. What am I going to do? My poor son has become a monk. I'll never have grandchildren, all of that. So to have Vivekananda's mother happy that he had joined the monastery is an exception. As a young boy, I used to visit the monastery at Alam Bazar with my parents. The Bellarmont was not yet founded. Swamis Brahmananda, Ramakrishna, Shivananda, Turiyananda, and Advaitananda were living there at the time. Sometimes I would stay at the monastery for several days. I thought of Maharaj as being very stern and would carefully avoid him. Swami Turiyananda was affectionate toward me, and I felt free with him. The nights I passed in the monastery, I used to sleep in the same room with Swami Turiyananda. He used to wake up at midnight and would wake me also at that hour to meditate. After Swami Vivekananda passed away, Maharaj and Swami Turiyananda went to Vrindavan and practiced austerities. A short time thereafter, my father and I went there also. Whenever my father visited the Swamis, I would accompany him. As I knew Swami Turiyananda intimately, I would pass most of my time in his company. Maharaj lived in a room adjoining his. Every time I called on Swami Turiyananda, I would prostrate before him, then slowly open the door to Maharaj's room and bow down to Maharaj from the door. I was nervous in his presence, regarding him as very serious and austere, and so would not go inside the room to prostrate or touch his feet. Watching my behavior one day, Swami Turiyananda remarked, "What is this? Go in, prostrate before Maharaj, and touch his blessed feet." With trepidation in my heart, I entered the room, did as I was told, and then stood silently by Maharaj. He looked at me graciously and said in an affectionate voice, "Child, massage my feet." With these words, he lay down. I began to massage him, though still nervous. He sensed it immediately and said, "Don't be nervous, my son." He touched my back, and with his touch there came a complete transformation in me. I seemed to lose all strength of body and helplessly lay down at his feet. Facetiously, Maharaj said, "Ah, you are making a pillow of my feet instead of massaging them." My heart was filled with unspeakable joy. I sat up and said, "You have done something to me." Then I began to laugh, being unable to hold the joy within. All my fear was gone, and for the first time I had a taste of God's love emanating from Maharaj. Afterward, I heard that Maharaj remarked jokingly to Swami Turiyananda, "You see, I have stolen your disciple." And that Swami Turiyananda laughed and said, "Splendid. Now the boy is blessed indeed." At the earnest request of Swami Brahmananda, Maharaj left for Bellarmont. Father and I accompanied him. On our way to Belur, Maharaj expressed the desire to visit the Divine Mother's temple at the Vijayachala Mountains. The first night, Maharaj, my father, our host, Yogendra Sen, a devotee, and I slept in the same room. It was nearing midnight, and I felt a gentle touch. I woke up. I saw Maharaj dressed and covered with a heavy blanket. He said to me, "Get up and dress yourself in warm clothing. I want you to come with me." Without hesitation, I did as I was told, though it did not occur to me at the time to inquire where we were going. Maharaj took a lantern in one hand and a stick in the other and asked me to follow him. We went outside. It was the night of the new moon and pitch dark. The path was uneven. Realizing that I was stumbling, Maharaj gave me the lantern to carry and held me by the hand. I asked him then, "Where are we going?" He replied, "To see the Divine Mother." When we entered the temple compound, we found the place crowded with worshippers. Some were counting beads and others were chanting the praises of the Divine Mother. There was an intense spiritual atmosphere. The door of the temple was still closed. The priests were decorating the Mother's image for the special occasion. When the doors opened, the pilgrims stood up and moved forward slowly to have the darshan of Mother. In the meantime, the priests caught sight of Maharaj. Seeing his benign face and impressed by his personality, they stopped the pilgrims from proceeding and let Maharaj enter first. He was still holding my hand, and I was following him. When Maharaj stood before the image of Divine Mother, he exclaimed, "Oh, how beautiful, how beautiful." The next moment, he was in ecstasy. There was perfect silence in the temple. The priests and pilgrims watched Maharaj's God-intoxicated state in amazement. After a while, still in an ecstatic mood, Maharaj asked me to sing a song to Divine Mother. While I was singing, tears of joy fell from the outer corners of his eyes. It was a divine sight to behold. Maharaj asked me to sing another song, after which we prostrated before the Mother and came out into the courtyard. Maharaj sat down in one corner to perform japam and asked me to sit also. I said, "What shall I do?" Maharaj replied, "Think of the presence of Divine Mother. Later I shall instruct you." We stayed for a while and returned to Yogendra Sen's before daybreak. At the foot of a mountain near Vindhyachala, there was a cave temple. One day we went with some other devotees to a picnic nearby. While the devotees were busy preparing vegetables and getting ready to cook, Maharaj asked me to follow him. We began to climb the mountain and reached the door of the cave temple. It was pitch dark inside. We entered the cave and proceeded slowly until we came near the deity. It was very quiet, and even the noise of a bird could be heard. Maharaj sat by the image of Divine Mother, and I sat near him. After some time, he asked me to sing the praises of Mother. While listening to the song, Maharaj went into ecstasy, as he had done in the other temple. First, his body shook a little, the hair of the body stood on end, and tears of joy ran down his cheeks. Then he became perfectly still. He was completely unconscious. I was not worried, because I had heard of Sri Ramakrishna going into samadhi this way. After some time, Maharaj slowly regained his normal consciousness, and we came out of the cave. I thought that we would now return to the picnic grounds, but instead Maharaj began to climb higher up the mountain. I followed him. We reached the summit. Maharaj seated himself on a rock in yoga posture and asked me to do the same. While sitting, I thought to myself, well, Maharaj has asked me to sit here, but he has not yet instructed me. I asked him on what and how I should meditate. His answer was, meditate on any aspect of God that appeals to you. Another day we climbed the mountain from a different side. When we reached the summit, the sun was setting. Maharaj asked me to sing this following song. The day is gone, O my mind. What preparations have you made to cross this ocean of worldliness? The sun of life is about to set. Though you see it setting, you pay no heed. Deluded by the maya of this ephemeral world, you lose the treasure eternal. While listening, Maharaj became absorbed in meditation. After the song, he remained in that state for a while. It was getting dark and we went home. Thus, instead of the 3 days that Maharaj had originally planned to stay at Vindhyachala, we spent 21 days there before Maharaj returned to Bellarmont. and next week we will start on Swami Nirvanananda. He was Maharaj's personal attendant for many years, and as we just read, he was one of the attendants there at his death. Any comments? Are there any comment? Sunanda?
Do we know where the temple is in Vindhyachala Mountains?
No, I don't. Do you, Vrajaprana?
No, I can't remember if it's that one near Madras or not. There's one near Mysore, but I don't know if it's the Vindhyachala.
I have no idea. I know we went to some that were, we went to quite a few that were up on top of a mountain that I have no idea where we were in India. But it would be something to look up, because I'm sure it's, we can look that up for the next time.
Yeah, I mean, what an amazing atmosphere.
I know. Amazing atmosphere. Okay, anyone else? Any comments? Okay, I'll make a comment.
Krishna Prana,
Yes.
it's in the city, the town is in the city of Mirzapur district of the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, meaning North India. The city is a Hindu pilgrimage site having the temple of Vidyavasini, who according to the Markandeya Purana had incarnated to kill the demon Maheshwara.
Okay.
Now,
Maharashtra, did you say?
No, UP.
no,
UP.
Uttar Pradesh. Uttar
UP.
Pradesh.
Okay,
Yeah.
North India.
Yeah.
I would imagine if he was only going to spend 3 days there, that it would have to be kind of North India to get back to Calcutta. But yeah, 21 days later.
And you can go there by train. There's a direct route on the Delhi-Howrah route and the Mumbai-Howrah route.
Okay.
And so in case anyone is ready to go,
If the trains are running right now in India.
the Indian code is BDL in case you want to get there.
Thank you, Amrit. Okay. I think next week. Okay.
Next week is Buddha Purnima.
I'm sorry, it's Guru Purnima?
No, it's Buddha.
Buddha
Purnima. Yeah. What day is that?
Wednesday.
Wednesday board meeting. Buddha Purnima. And yes. And Sunday, Vrajaprana will speaking on presence from Buddha. So we'll be all ready for Buddha Purnima. Saturday, we'll have the regular Gospel of Ramakrishna at 5 o'clock. And I think that's all for this week. And we'll end with a chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.